Hi everyone. So we're going to be moving on to balancing chemical equations, but before you can do that, you need to know how to count the atoms in a chemical formula. So I just want to go through a couple scenarios that you're going to see really quickly. So you're going to see a couple different things. First thing that you're going to see are subscripts, which are just the little numbers that you'll see next to the element symbol. You'll see situations where there's no parentheses involved. But then you'll see situations where there are parentheses involved. So, for example, this 3 is on the outside of the parentheses, and that you handle that a little bit differently than you would the ones in the first example. And then we have something called a coefficient, which is just this larger number that falls before the entire formula. So when you count your atoms, you're just going to list out the elements in the formula. Like this formula has sodium, sulfur, and oxygen. And there's nothing really fancy here. We just have that subscript of 2 for the sodium, so that means that there's 2. Sulfur, when there's no subscript listed, it's an implied 1. So there would be 1 atom of sulfur here. And then we have the 3 that goes to the oxygen. And that's it. When you have parentheses, you handle that just a little bit differently. So a subscript that falls outside of the parentheses, like that 3 here, only applies to the elements that are inside of the parentheses. So that 3 would apply to sulfur and oxygen, but not to aluminum. So if we're going to list out our elements, we're going to list out aluminum, sulfur, and oxygen. Aluminum, there's no parentheses or anything like that, so you just take the subscript that's there. Sulfur is on the inside of the parentheses, and normally we would say that has that implied 1, but we have that 3 as a subscript on the outside. So what we have to do is multiply the 1 sulfur inside by the 3 that's on the outside. So that becomes 1 times 3, which are actually 3 atoms of sulfur. And same goes with the oxygen. So right now we have a 4 on the inside, but we have that 3 on the outside that applies to the 4 as well. So that becomes 4 times 3, which means we actually have 12 oxygen atoms here. Now, a coefficient applies to the entire chemical formula. So you have to do the stuff above with the subscripts, and then you also have to multiply it by that coefficient, which in this case is 3. So if we're listing out our elements, we're going to have Pb for lead, N for nitrogen, and O for oxygen. Now let's go through each one. So our lead, it's not on the inside of the parentheses, so this 2 has nothing to do with the lead. It just has that little implied 1 because there's nothing listed. So 1 times our coefficient of 3 gives us a total of 3 atoms of lead. Nitrogen, on the inside of our parentheses, has that implied 1. We have a 2 that applies to the nitrogen on the outside of the parentheses, so that's already 1 times 2. But then we also have our coefficient of 3 here. So we're multiplying that by 3, which gives us a total of 6. Same goes with the oxygen. There's 3 that's directly next to it. There's the 2 on the outside, so we already have 3 times 2. But then we have that 3 as a coefficient that we need to multiply. That gives us a total of 18 oxygen atoms here. And that would be it. Now, obviously, if you can do that in your head, you don't need to write out like all of this math here or anything like that, but just figured I'd show you in case that's helpful. And once you know that, then you're ready to move on to balancing.